Hi everybody, welcome to another video about game version differences. Here in front of me I have two copies of a game called Haunted House, an early text adventure which was released in 1979 originally for the TRS-80 family of computers. Now these games that TRS-80 put out, that Radio Shack rather put out for the TRS-80, and TRS stands for Tandy Radio Shack, so that was the name of their label. These games that Radio Shack put out in the early days tended to all have a uniform size manual that came in a plastic bag. It did not come in a box. Here's an example of one of those, another game from Radio Shack that Radio Shack published. This is an original type of manual where it's sort of sealed at the top with sort of a Ziploc, not exactly. Let's see, this one says Radio Shack $14.95 price sticker on it. But these are not the original bags. I don't have quite enough of those. What I did was I replaced them with these magazine-sized comic book bags, which actually are just about exactly the right size to fit these games from Radio Shack. So if you need to replace a bag, that's certainly an option. But anyway, these games came in these plastic bags with just a manual and the cassette tape. And for those of you who are somewhat younger, you might be surprised to know that games at one point, before digital, before CDs and DVDs, before cartridges, before floppy disks even, games used to come on cassette tapes. And just connected your cassette tape player to your computer and pressed play and typed in the right instructions on the computer and it was able to read in the game. So these are two copies here of this game, Haunted House, as I said, an early text adventure. When you look at them on first glance, they look pretty similar. The only real thing you notice as a difference is that the logos for Radio Shack are different on the two packaging. This is a white logo, this is a black and white logo. It's a little bit different. Now, let's take out the manuals and tapes from the plastic so we can examine them a little more closely and see what other differences there might be. First, I'll take out the tape. I'll put it over here. Take out the manual, take out the tape from this one, put it over here, I don't mix them up, and take out the manual. Now, again, they look almost identical, except for the logo, and the other thing which you'll notice now that I uncovered it, is that this one on the left here says, it's a thrill-packed game of mystery and adventure for your 4K level 1 or 2 TRS-80 microcomputer. Level 1 or 2 being two different types of BASIC that you might have installed in your computer. BASIC being a relatively early programming language, pretty simple one that a lot of early games were written in before people sort of knew better. But that's what it says here. It's for either type of TRS-80 microcomputer. Level 1 or Level 2 BASIC. Now this one on the right here says a thrill-packed game of mystery and adventure for your Model 1 or Model 3 with Level 1, Level 2, or Model 3 BASIC. Now, what that means, you can tell by looking at that, this is an earlier release of the game here. This game was for only the original TRS-80 Model 1, which came out, I believe, in 1977. And the game, as I said, came out in 1979. Now, at some point, I think in 1980, Radio Shack released another version of the computer called the Model 3, which was different in a number of ways, but it was backwards compatible with the Model 1. So most of these games and software that ran on the Model 1 would also run on the Model 3. So Radio Shack released another version of the packaging basically telling Model 3 users that this game will also work for them and they can go ahead and purchase it. So we can see just from looking at that right away, this is a later version when Model 3 was already out. This is an earlier version that predates the Model 3. Now if I flip over and look at the back, again, they're very similar. One difference you might see in the text is that this one on the left here says it's a game of mystery and excitement that runs on all 4K level 1 or 2 TRS-80 computers. This one here on the right doesn't say that. I guess they would have had to also mention Model 3, and they probably figured it wasn't worth it, so they just took that text out. The other difference you might notice is that on the bottom here it says custom manufactured in USA for Radio Shack, a division of Tandy Corporation. And this one here on the right does not say that, so we'll explain that more in a second. But for now, let's open up these manuals and see what's inside. So let's first open up the original one, the older one. And when we open up, we see that it's very basic. It's just a folder, basically, with some hole punches. There's no actual pages inside aside from the two covers. And the information is relatively basic. Here we have a warranty on the left. Then there's a notice saying that it's the first edition. And they wrote here, first of all, copyright 1980, even though apparently it was 1979. So that's an example of how you can't always trust the copyright information printed on games. Sometimes they predate it, sometimes they postdate it. So don't always take it with a grain of salt. But it says here it's copyright 1980 device-oriented games licensed to Tandy Corporation. So this game actually was produced by another company called Device Oriented Games. They made a few text adventures for Tandy Radio Shack, and they licensed it to Radio Shack. Then on the right side here, we have basically a description of what the game is, what the backstory is. Here's a section playing the game, so how do you enter your text commands. And then here on the bottom is loading instructions, and they're slightly different between level 1 and level 2 basic. But that's basically it. That's the whole manual. Now let's look at the later version. When we open this one up, we see that there's a few more pages in here. They decided actually to add a few pages and make it more of a proper manual. But the information is actually pretty much the same. So we have a nice title page, which I guess doesn't really serve any purpose. The warranty is actually moved to the back inside cover. It takes up the whole cover now. There's a little more legalese. On the second page here, we have the description of when it was created and all that. You can see that it's not a first printing, as the number line here goes to 2. But it says here, Haunted House Program, copyright 1979, device-oriented games, licensed to Tandy Corporation, all rights reserved. So here it says 1979. The program is again licensed to Tandy Corporation. But the manual is separate now, and it says Haunted House Program Manual, copyright 1979-1981, Tandy Corporation, all rights reserved. So, first of all, you can tell from this that this was released a little bit later, approximately 1981. The Model 3 again came out in 1980. You can't trust the date exactly, but it's probably pretty close. The second thing you see here is that they listed the program and the manual separately. So presumably it sounds like what happened here is that at some point Radio Shack said to Device Oriented Games, we don't need you guys to make the manual for us. We'll take care of this new revision of the manual by ourselves, and we'll produce it. And that might have something to do with why there's more pages. It's possible why it's a little bit more of a manual. Maybe they figured, this is our corporate standard, we need to make it look a little bit nicer. I'm not really sure, but apparently it's something that Radio Shack did. And that would also explain why here in the original version on the back, it says custom manufactured in USA for Radio Shack, whereas in the other one it doesn't, because apparently this original version was made by Device Oriented Games for Radio Shack, and this other version here was not. So back to this later version, we again have loading instructions for level 1, level 2. This time there's a little more verbiage here about Model 3. We have a Model 3 disk system, Model 3 basic, Model 3 users, Model 3 users, a few other mentions of Model 3 that makes the loading instructions a little bit longer. Then again, we have Haunted House, and we have playing the game. That text is basically the same. So another possibility is that when they had to add a little more text related to the Model 3, they decided at that point, our original manual, we tried to be a little bit cheap and, get by on just the inside covers, but it was pretty tight on space, and if we have to add some more text, it's going to look even worse. So you know what, let's just add a couple of pages and make it look a little bit nicer. So that's another possibility of what they did there. In any case, again, this is the original release. This is the re-release here with more pages. So now let's look at the cassette tapes. The cassette tapes, again, are pretty similar. If you look at each one, you'll see a couple things. First of all, this is the one I believe came with the original release, so it's hard to tell sometimes with these things. It says on it, copyright Device-Oriented Games 1979, licensed to Tandy Corporation. We've seen that already. This side is actually, the first side over here is the back. The one I was showing was the back before. You can see there's two sides of the cassette with two different versions of the program on it. This one here is for level 1, it says here. And the one on the other side is for level 2. And there's some instructions what to do when you're actually loading the program. So aside from the manual, they give you some instructions here when it says mem size, hit enter. When it says then type system, then type haunt, hit enter. So there's a little loading instructions here. The other one is same type of thing. Again, we have copyright device-oriented games 1979. One side of the tape is level 1 basic. The other side of the tape is level 2 basic. And again, the loading instructions. So what are the differences? Well, there's two differences here. The first one is that on this older version, the text that says device-oriented games is a little bit larger. On this one on the right, it's a little bit smaller. The font is also a little bit different between the two of them. So I don't know why that is. I guess at some point they decided to change the font and to change the size of some of the text. No idea why. The other difference is if you look at the level 1 sides of the tape, this one here on the left says you're supposed to type haunt. If you look over here, it says type haunt. And this one here is just blank. And actually, this one on the right appears to be the correct instructions, because if you look at the actual manual, it says for level 2, you're supposed to type haunt, but for level 1, it's going to just load by itself and you don't have to type anything. So my guess is that when they put the original version of the cassette out here, they made a mistake, and they had both sides the same, haunt on both sides. And then when they reissued the cassette for the Model 3 release, they correctly, even though it says here on this side for level 2 basic, you type haunt, for level 1 basic, you leave it blank. So that's one of the reasons why I'm pretty sure this one goes with this release. So again, there are some differences between these games. Some of them are relatively minor. Some of them might be less minor if you actually, let's say, are trying to play a game on a certain type of computer. But the bottom line is, if you're looking at this on eBay and you just see this, especially if these things are covered, maybe this is flipped over to this side, you have the logo, but aside from that, you might not know that there's any difference between these two. You might think they're exactly the same game and the same release and the same title, and they're not. They're slightly different. And if that matters to you, you need to know about these things. So I hope this video was educational and somewhat entertaining, and have a good day, everybody.